every Jew knows that part of our Masorah, part of what gets transmitted from generation to generation, are Nigunim, are tunes. I want to teach you a Nigun today in honor of Shabbat Chazon that I hope each and every one of us can take Chizuk from. I've taken a lot of Chizuk from it in these last months, and I want to share it with you today. But first, I need to tell you the story behind the Nigun. It's a story of two young boys, Naphtali and his younger brother Lulik, who is age 7, who are separated from their mother in late November 1944 and put onto a cattle car, which brings them the next day, on Friday, to Chestechova, a labor camp. The younger boy cried inconsolably the whole night after the separation from their mother, which, having previously been separated, the family from their father, they understood that this parting was also to be a final one. And the whole train was unloaded, and all the people were put into a large barracks where they were forced to stay. There was no furniture in it, and you had to sleep on the floor. Naphtali, the older brother, took out the blanket that their mother had packed for them and covered his younger brother and himself in order to keep warm. And as the younger brother was crying himself to sleep, the older brother, Naphtali, could hear at the other end of the barracks someone was singing a nigun. And he, Naphtali, recognized the nigun. You see, he recognized it from when the family had lived in the environs of Krakow. When the Baba Rebbe, Rav Ben Zion Halberstam, would come to visit Krakow, would come with his Chazon, and this Chazon, Yossel Mandelbaum was his name, would sing this nigun. So Naphtali crawls across the floor to see the great Chazon, Yossel Mandelbaum. He doesn't recognize him, emaciated, no beard, but he has a circle of men sitting around him, clearly other Hasidim, and they're singing a song. What's the song? What are the words? Every Jew knows the words to the song. They're from Lecha Dodi. Mikdash Melech Ir Melucha, sanctuary of the king, royal city. Kumi tzii mitocha afecha, arise and depart from the upheaval. Ravlach shevet be'emek habacha, too long do you sit in the valley of tears. V'yachamol alayich chemla, and he will shower you with compassion. Lulik, the younger brother, in his autobiography, says that he would sing this nigun to console himself, to escape the labor camp and later in Buchenwald, where he was interned, in order to imagine, again, that first Shabbos, that first Leil Shabbat, together with his brother, when the two of them heard and were taught that nigun again, reminded that nigun by Chazon Mandelbaum. Now, the two boys actually struck up an acquaintance, not only an acquaintance, but had an interaction with this Chazon Mandelbaum. They would sing together, learn together. Chazon Mandelbaum asked the older brother, could I borrow your one volume, Mikrot Gedol Chumash? And Naphtali gave it to him. When the two boys were later deported to Buchenwald, they saw in a heap of clothing and personal effects, there was the Mikrot Gedol Chumash. They surmised that, obviously, unfortunately, Yossel Mandelbaum was killed. Fast forward now to the end, after the war, 40 years later. Naphtali is, of course, Naphtali Lau Lavi, and Lulik is Harav Yisrael Meir Lau, the former chief rabbi of Medinat Yisrael, now his son, of David Lau, serving in that capacity. Naphtali Lau Lavi was the consul general of Israel in New York. And he got an invitation from the Baba Rebbe, the son of Rav Ben Zion Halberstam, who sadly was murdered in the war. The new Rebbe was Rav Shlomo Halberstam, to come in order to be at some kind of event, and it was a bris, something like that. And the Rebbe invited Naphtali Lau Lavi to sit next to him on the dais at the table. And the two of them got to talking. They spoke a little bit about the family. The Rebbe wanted to know about Yisrael Meir Lau. At that time, he was the chief rabbi of Netanya. After that, he went from there to Tel Aviv, and then, of course, to the chief rabbinate of Israel. But in the context of the conversation, Naphtali Lau Lavi said to the Baba Rebbe, wistfully, that there was this beautiful nigun, Mikdash Melech, that was sung by this Chazon Yossel Mandelbaum. But sadly, he didn't make it through the war. The Rebbe turns to a Gabbai, whispers to the Gabbai, and of course, within a few minutes, the Gabbai returns, and under his arm, he's taken under the arm, an elderly Jew with a long white beard. And the Rebbe says to Naphtali Lau Lavi, this is Chazon Yossel Mandelbaum. Lau Lavi writes in his book that he tried to engage the man in conversation, but he couldn't tell, he still doesn't know Was he cognitively impaired, or was he just trying to suppress the memory of the war? Every question of Talil Alavi asked him, he kept answering again and again, I do not remember when and where I was deported. But then the Rebbe turned to Chazon Mandelbaum and he said to him, could you please honor us? Would you sing again, Mikdash Melech? And so this is the Nigun of Yossel Mandelbaum, the Chazon of the Bobover court of Mikdash Melech. Mikdash Melech, Ir Melucha, Kumitzei, Mitoch ha'hafeicha, Kumitzei, Mitoch ha'hafeicha. Havlach shevet b'yemek habacha vehu yachamol alayichem la vehu yachamol alayichem. We're approaching Shabbat Chazon. It's not really the Shabbos of singing, it's the Shabbos really of vision. It's named for the Haftorah's opening word, Chazon. It's the vision, the Chazon of Yishai ben Amoz. The truth is, the vision of Yeshayahu Hanavi was a vision of looming catastrophe that could still be averted, but was coming closer and closer. Now, later on in Jewish history, in the 16th century, in Eretz Yisrael, in Tzfat, was the generation after the expulsion of the Jews of Spain, hundreds of thousands of Jews expelled on Tisha B'Av in 1492. And other visionaries arose in that place at that time in Eretz Yisrael. They were not Nevi'im, but perhaps they were B'nai Nevi'im. These were people who looked not only at the tragic dimensions of Jewish history, but also sought to express hope for the future and to be able to discern the latent layers of reality, the ruchani dimension of the world around us, the unseen, the hidden, the esoteric. We call this whole body of teaching of Torah the Kabbalah, because it's a received tradition. It too is part of our Masorah. In that circle of Chachamim was the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, not only as the author of the Shulchan Aruch, but also the writer of various other Sifrei Kodesh. The Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, the Ari HaKadosh, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, and Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz, the author of many Sfarim, but most famously of those words of Mikdash Melech as part of Lecha Dodi. Now, Lecha Dodi is a song primarily, of course, about Shabbat, but it is also about our relationship with Hashem. It's about the Jewish people, and indeed about Yerushalayim. And on all counts, it's a song of longing. After the first two stanzas about Shabbat, Rabbi Shlomo Halevi, as it were, turns to Yerushalayim and looks at it and says, Kumitzi mitocha afeicha. Get up, arise, depart from that upheaval. It's enough already in the veil of tears. Now, what links these two, Shabbat and Yerushalayim? Quite obviously, they're both about Kedusha, Kedushat Zman, Kedushat Makom. But there's something else. It's a vision. It's either a vision of catastrophe and destruction. Amar Abaye lo charvi Yerushalayim el bisfil shechilu ba et Shabbat. The Gemara, Masachet Shabbat, the statement from Abaye, Yerushalayim was destroyed because people didn't keep Shabbos. That's what it says. Because of the desecration of Shabbat came destruction. And so the two are intermingled. But it could also be a Shabbat and Yerushalayim connected through a vision of redemption and of rebuilding. As that same Gemara teaches, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Mishum Bar Yochai, Ilmole Misham Nisal Shtei Shabbatot Kehilchatan Miyad Nigalim. If only the Jewish people would observe two Shabbatot properly, according to halacha, they would immediately be redeemed. Now, none of these people in this circle lived to see the vision realized, but just picture the point that we're up to today with all of our challenges and all of our difficulties and uncertainties and all of our upheaval, of this last period. In 1572, one in that circle, Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, who is by all accounts the most influential of all the Mekubalim of all time, he was stricken by a plague that hit the Galil in that year. And he died of the virus on Hey Av. This Sunday is his yahrzeit. He was 38 years old. They died, but their vision did not die. They died, but their Nigunim and their Masorah kept going. And we carry that Masorah now. The Shemi Shmuel writes that the Mikdash Melech being referenced in this beautiful song is not just Yerushalayim, but also Mikdash Melech, hu halev shel Yisrael. It is also the heart of every Jew. The Mikdash Malko shel Olamhu, because it, the human heart, the Jewish heart, is the sanctuary of the King of the world. For 6 days of the week, we live, he says, with a sense of upheaval. But when it comes to Shabbos, b'Shabbat yotzin mitoch ha'afecha. On Shabbat, every Jew can find, hopefully, some way of leaving the upheavals of the heart to find tranquility and peace. Parshat Devarim, this week's Torah portion, is filled with words spoken by Moshe Rabbeinu in the last days of his life. The first sentence of the speeches of the last days of his life is Hashem Elokeinu diber Elenu b'chorev lemor Rav lachem shevet bahar hazeh. Hashem, our God, spoke to us in Chorev, saying, "You have stayed at this mountain for too long." And Chorev means Mount Sinai. But the Tiferet Shlomo, Rabbi Shlomo of Radomsk, asks why it is that it could have said Har Sinai and instead it chose to say the word Chorev. And he reads here a hint that perhaps on a certain level, the statement of Moshe Rabbeinu, the opening line is, Hashem, our God, spoke to us, B'chorev, meaning not just Har Sinai, but also at a time of Churban. That even if the Beit HaMikdash will be destroyed, God forbid, nonetheless, Rav Lachem, you have very much, because at this mountain, Bahar Hazeh, what did you get? Don't read it as Shevet, but Shabbat. You have the gift of Shabbat. Says the Reb Shlomo of Radomsk, Sha'af sheBeit HaMikdash nignaz, acha Shabbat kayam le'ulam. Even if the Beit HaMikdash will be hidden away and out of our view, nonetheless, Shabbat is standing forever. And this is the idea. Rav Lachem Shevet Bahar Hazeh, Rav Lachem Shabbat Bahar Hazeh. Let Shabbos, he says, be our Rebbe, our teacher, even in these days, even in Chutz La'aretz. He writes on that each of us should be able to take some chizuk from this beautiful nigun and to recognize that we also need to have a Masorah of nigunim, even at this time. There's a nigun for L'cha Dodi tonight to Elit Zion. There's a nigun to Sefer Kinot, also known as Megillat Eicha. There's a nigun for learning. There's a nigun for singing happy songs. There is, in fact, also a nigun for crying. And there's also the nigun of a chazon, of a vision of the future. V'hu yachamol alayich chemla. And he, meaning HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will shower much compassion upon you, the Lev Yisrael, the Mikdash Melech. Shabbat Shalom.